If there was still any doubt where the District Attorney of Los Angeles stood on the question of Lyle and Erik Menendez getting out of prison, tonight there's a whole lot less of that doubt. DA Nathan Hochman just announced his opposition today to one of the pathways to freedom for those two men, a resentencing, which is a process that would make them eligible for parole almost immediately. The DA basically said the brothers have told too many lies and not enough admissions over the years about what they did before, during, and after their parents' murders. But the DA did leave the door open, a little teeny tiny crack, by suggesting that if Erik and Lyle come clean on 16 specific quote-unquote lies he says they told, then his office might consider that resentencing bid once again. Family members of Erik and Lyle, who are also family members of Kitty and Jose Menendez, the victims, they were quick to criticize the DA for the position that he's taking. And I'm pleased to welcome Lyle and Erik's cousins, Tamara Goodall and Anna Maria Baralt. Ladies, thank you so much for joining me tonight. I'm sorry this is such a tough day for you. Like these tsunamis of news have to be really hard for you to process. Anna Maria, let me start with you. The accusation is that the DA says Erik and Lyle have told 20 lies and only accounted for 4 of them, which leaves 16 lies uncorrected. And if only they would cop to these lies about the situation around that crime, then he would reconsider the resentencing. Tell me where you stand on that, and if that's a path forward or a non-starter.
Ashley, first of all, thank you for having us on today. I really appreciate you allowing our voices to be heard alongside of his. And the very first thing I want to do is correct an urban legend that he keeps repeating, which is that Lyle and Erik kneecapped Jose and Kitty. That did not happen. That is not the case. If you look at the crime scene photos, you'll see a wound on Jose's thigh. Both kneecaps are intact. So I'm not sure where he got that from, why he keeps repeating it. But just first off, that is not true. So the second thing I want to say is that it was made very clear to us when we met with the past administration's resentencing team that resentencing was about rehabilitation and life post-conviction. So this constant replaying of the original crime and this laundry list of quote-unquote lies that were addressed during cross-examination, I'm not sure why he thinks this is relevant. I really don't. That is not how it's explained to us. Those are questions, remorse, accountability, those are questions for the parole board. They are not for this. This is about rehabilitation and where the victim's family stands.
So I always think about the technical legalities of, these 3 pathways are all different. And they're still all in play, even though 2 of them are not looking as good. And that second one, which, was sort of dashed last week or the week before, was the habeas corpus petition for a brand new trial. That would be based on the original trial, the original defense, and the maintenance of the fact that they said it was self-defense. The DA says it wasn't self-defense because you've got to be in imminent danger. So is it necessary for Lyle and Erik to technically maintain that defense until that habeas thing is out and gone? In order to keep that second path alive, meaning they can't. They couldn't possibly do, even if they wanted to, they couldn't possibly admit to these 16 things because it will dash pathway number 2. Does that sound, I'm not sure if I'm being as good as I should be, but take a stab at that if you would, Tamara, and tell me if that's something that hamstrings the boys' attempts to even come into, satisfaction with the DA on the 16 requirements.
First of all, thank you. As Anna Maria said, I really appreciate you giving us a voice. I'm really filled with emotion today, especially after Hochman's earlier press conference. So with all of that said, I'm just so disheartened by all of the same regurgitation of all of the same points from 1989 through 1996. Like, there is nothing new that he has said, and truly what this is evident of, at least in my mind, is that he is so focused on the past and he has not demonstrated any understanding of what their activities and their work has been since they have been incarcerated. As far as the habeas is concerned, We did not know of the letter until well after the conviction, and Roy Rosello wasn't about to come out and say anything in 1996. He was not in a place to do that. So we have those two pieces of evidence now, which allows in what has been explained to me. Now, I'm not a lawyer of any sort, but has been explained to me that this is applicable. Both pieces are applicable. And when Andy wrote that letter or Andy received that letter, come on, you're 13, you're putting it away. And like Anna Maria has said previously, you're picking up the phone at that point. You're not, I mean, do you think at 13 you really understand, especially in 1989, what the implications of that, something of that magnitude is going to be? So, with that, I'm really disheartened at a lack of understanding and the fact that Hochman feels this need to keep comparing this case to Sirhan. They are just different. They are on different levels altogether. So, I mean, enough with that. Truly, it's Erik and Lyle have their own case, and it has nothing to do. It's not comparing apples to apples.
It's definitely different, that's for sure. I mean, Sirhan did not even know the man that he was shooting, and he attempted to kill 5 other people, and they were unknown to him as well. I would be concerned about releasing someone who was that, unconnected to his victims. There seems to be a real connection, clearly, between Lyle and Erik and Jose and Kitty, obviously. Let me ask you this, Anna Maria. Uncle Milton, that's Kitty's brother, died recently, which was the last holdout to supporting the release. So now there is not one family member who is alive who supports keeping Lyle and Erik in prison, which is huge, right? It is very unusual to have victims' family members all in support of releasing the killers. It's almost unheard of. Do you feel as though that has fallen on deaf ears? And I ask that mostly because I see just recently, I think even just today, you have filed a complaint with the Attorney General about the DA and said this is a Marsy's Law violation. The news conference today, we weren't informed of it as victims, and we have the right to be informed. We feel we've been, I think you said he's been hostile, Nathan Hochman, and patronizing and aggressive. Where does this go from here? Are you finished having conversations with the DA as the victims' family members? Because he's technically your lawyers, right? And our lawyers, too. Is that done? Is that, is that chasm unclosable?
Well, apparently, since he did not notify us ahead of time before he went and did this press conference, that is a violation of Marsy's Law. From what I understand, it was actually Tamara, who's with me today, who was the name on the complaint about the meeting that we had. As far as Milton is concerned, he was the last family member who was going to be actively fighting against the release of Lyle and Erik. And I think that should say something. It begs the question of whom exactly is District Attorney Hochman serving? Listen, the streets of Los Angeles are not safer tonight because Lyle and Erik Menendez are behind bars. That is a ridiculous thing to say. So for him to stand up and say that they're too dangerous because they haven't copped to lies that they told when they were very young and terrified about the consequences of their actions, which they have apologized up and down, left and right to everybody for, who is he serving? They're not a danger. The victim's family, that's us. We're here today talking to you about how we want them out. He's not serving us. I don't understand. It is only his personal self-interest that he is serving right now, and that has been made clear.
Okay, well, we are not finished our conversation. Obviously, there's still one more pathway, and who knows what'll happen even if this March 20th hearing happens, because it's the court, it's not the DA that decides this. So Tamara Goodell and Anna Maria Baralt, thank you so much for tonight. I hope you'll come back when the next, development happens, and by my watch, that's like a week and a half. So until then, fingers crossed for you and your family and the peace that you all deserve.
Thank you, Ashley.
We are 5 months almost to the day from the start of Bryan Kohberger's quadruple murder trial in Idaho. I know, feels like it's been a decade. But today we're getting our biggest sneak peek yet at the strategies in play on both sides of the case. And when I say big, I kind of mean bombshell. Weirdly enough, it is all in a prosecution court filing, but the real stunner is actually from the defense, quoted by the prosecution. Bryan Kohberger's team has tried and tried and tried and failed every single time to throw out the process that linked him to the DNA that was on the knife sheath left behind at the scene. But now we're hearing that his team apparently plans to just admit it at trial, that indeed it is Bryan's DNA on that knife sheath. But, and it's a big one, that somebody else planted the knife sheath there. Okay, here we go again. Yeah, it's his DNA on the knife sheath, but somebody else planted it. So that's the argument now. But here's what the state has to say about that. And I'll just read it because it's good. Instead of challenging the conclusion that the DNA on the knife sheath belonged to defendant, the defense's expert disclosures reveal that the defense plans to argue the DNA on the knife sheath does not prove defendant was ever at the crime scene, and the knife sheath itself could have been planted by the real perpetrator, end quote. We'll see how that goes over with the jury, but prosecutors are making concessions too about the fight over genetic genealogy that brought them right to Kohberger. They say jurors don't really need to hear all about the chain of events that led them to the Kohberger family home in Pennsylvania. Instead, they say an investigator will simply testify, quote, that they received a tip pointing law enforcement to the defendant. That's it. Just a tip. It was just a tip that led Bryan Kohberger, who incidentally had his cheek swabbed, and his cheek matched the DNA on the knife sheath found beside Maddie Mogen's body. You see where I'm going with that giggle, right? Joining me now is NewsNation senior national correspondent Brian Enton, who's been following this case since the very beginning, and NewsNation legal contributor Jesse Weber, who's also a host at the Law and Crime Network. Okay, Brian, I'm going to start with you. I'm going to bring out my handy-dandy K-bar knife, right? It has the sheath, so I will take the knife out of the sheath because they did not find the knife at the scene. They just found the sheath. And the important part of the sheath was this little snap right here. Can you see it? Little snap. So when I snap it, I got to squeeze it with my fingers. And presumably I have left DNA behind on that button. And this is the significant piece that we're talking about. The tiny little piece of DNA that was found on that snap, on that knife sheath, right next to Maddie Mogen's body. I mean, are we really there? We've really come to an agreement that the prosecution does not even need to tell the jury how they got from this knife sheath to the Kohberger home in Pennsylvania.
Yeah, it is pretty surprising, Ashley. You have to think to yourself, if you were on that jury and they just said in court, oh, it's a tip that led us to Bryan Kohberger and led us to do the cheek swab and then connect the DNA from him to the knife sheath, it was just a tip. You'd have to imagine they would be sitting there wondering, well, what tip was it? How did you get to that point? We've now learned they're not going to find out. That's not going to come in during trial. The judge just ruled on that today. It's been a year, more than a year, that there's been so many court hearings and fights back and forth about the investigative genetic genealogy, the defense trying to poke holes in it, saying that it's unfair, saying that it's not scientifically tested, that it's a new technology that they used. I thought it was going to be a big part of their defense at trial. Apparently not. They've said they don't want to bring it in. The prosecution has said they don't want to bring it in. The judge has agreed, and it's apparently not coming in.
Jesse, I feel like those are several months I will never get back. The pitched battle between the defense and the prosecution, under seal, I might add, which drives me even crazier because to me that is secret justice, not American justice. But, you know, when it comes right down to it, Jesse Weber, a swath, you know, of his cheek matches the DNA on the knife sheath. Do we need to even know anything more than that? The DNA on here matches the DNA in that cheek. Does the jury need to know anything more than that?
Probably not, because let me break it down for this. So it is a 5.37 octillion times more likely that is Brian Kohberger's DNA than anybody else. Not a shocker. They're not trying to challenge it. But let's, for argument's sake, take this argument. Okay, it was his DNA on the knife sheath and somebody decided to plant it. Okay, so now you're wondering, how did that happen? How did the DNA get on the knife sheath? Who would want to frame him? And by the way, if this is a plot to really frame Brian Kohberger here, then this is somebody who would also have to make sure that his cell phone turned off at the key times during these murders, that the cell phone pings that were on would track the same movements of his car headed towards and away from the direction of that area, that the car would also have to be in that area at least 4 times that night. And also the assailant would have to dress up and look like somebody like Brian Kohberger, who matched the description from the eyewitness about the bushy eyebrows. So all of these things together would have to be someone framing Brian Kohberger. And call me crazy, but that seems to be beyond, belief. Now, I'm curious to see where they go with it. This is the prosecution's narrative of trying to say what the defense is going to do here. But I got to tell you, Ashley, after you said so many court hearings where they tried to make sure this evidence wouldn't come in, saying that his rights were constitutionally violated, that it wasn't reliable, at this point, their only option is to admit it is his DNA, but there's another explanation for why it's there. I'm curious to see what that explanation will be.
So once again, Brian, the knife sheath and the snap had a tiny, tiny little sample of DNA. And by the way, that tiny, tiny little sample was so tiny and the integrity of it was so questionable, it had to go to a specialist to pull out a full profile in order to be able to actually put it into the genealogy base. So if someone is trying to frame, if this is the defense argument, that someone is trying to frame Brian Kohberger, really? That's how they're going to frame him? Find something with barely any DNA on it at all and just hope that maybe they can find a sample, pull out that profile from that speck, that minuscule. I mean, doesn't it start to sound, and here's the word, really unreasonable?
It does, and I'm just trying to play it out in my mind. If they actually try to argue this out in court, are they going to say that there was someone out there who killed these college kids, who then went and got the knife sheath from Brian Kohberger, they stole it or something, and it had the little bit of DNA on Kohberger, and then went to the house and put it in there after doing it, or brought it with them and then dropped it on purpose, trying to frame Kohberger? I mean, it is all sort of hard to wrap your mind around. But Jesse made a good point. I think this is important. I mean, this all came out through a state filing, and it is the prosecutor who is trying to explain what the defense witness is going to say at trial, possibly. So this isn't coming directly from the defense. So maybe this is just one sort of theory that they've floated around and that they're not necessarily going to use as a defense at trial. We don't know, but it is kind of hard to imagine.
Yeah, if I were trying to frame someone and I was going into their apartment to steal their knife sheath, I would probably steal the hair from their hairbrush and leave the hair fibers on the body, which are perfectly traceable, instead of a knife sheath that barely had any DNA on it. But, that's just me. Hey, Brian Enton, Jesse Weber, thank you both. Really appreciate it.
You got it.
Thanks, Ash.
When firefighters in Waterbury, Connecticut responded to a house fire last month with 2 people in need of rescue, they had no idea what kind of rescue they'd be doing. The homeowner, 56-year-old Kimberly Sullivan, got out safely. But inside the home, firefighters found an extremely dirty 32-year-old man with rotten teeth and matted hair. He was 5'9", and he weighed just 68 pounds. I'll say that again, 5'9", 68 pounds. If he weighed twice that much, he would still be underweight for a healthy male. The man was Sullivan's stepson and the one who started the fire using printer paper, hand sanitizer, and a lighter. He told responders that he set the fire on purpose in a desperate attempt to escape the upstairs storage space where he says his stepmother held him captive behind plywood and padlocks for more than 20 years. 2 decades. Here's the chief of Waterbury Police.
33 years of law enforcement, this is the worst treatment of humanity that I've ever witnessed, right? I mean, honestly, when we first started talking about it, we really couldn't believe it. It took a lot of convincing amongst ourselves to just really accept what was going on, and it's really hard to talk about still. I mean, it's shuddering to think that someone would treat any person, let alone a family member or someone that was entrusted as a guardian or a parental figure in this way.
The man told the police detectives that he had been a prisoner in that room from the age of 11. And again, he's 32 years old, so that makes 21 years as a captive. He says he was locked in after his family discovered he was sneaking food at night. Decades ago in elementary school, the teachers said that they noticed him taking food from other kids or eating out of the garbage bins. Principal says that they called the Department of Children and Family Services more than 20 times. They said the child said he wasn't allowed to eat at home. But DCF says they have no record of any of those calls. In any case, the boy was yanked out of 4th grade by his family, never to be seen again. He says he spent the rest of his childhood, his adolescence, and his young adulthood locked in that room from 22 to 24 hours a day, existing on 2 small sandwiches and 2 bottles of water every day. At times, he says he was forced to drink from the toilet. He says he was only allowed to leave that room to do chores. To make matters worse, he says his father, who died last year, his 2 half-sisters, and his grandmother all knew about him in that storage space, yet no one helped. Tonight, Kimberly Sullivan, the stepmother, is facing charges including assault, kidnapping, and unlawful restraint, but denies that she did anything wrong. Her attorney calls the allegations, quote, outlandish and, quote, completely untrue, but he gave no explanation for why this man was so fiendishly mistreated and emaciated near death. We're going to be watching this one closely. Okay, I don't know what prison pastimes are popular in Idaho or Arizona, but pickleball is all the rage in California, including at the Mule Creek State Prison, which, as you will know, is the home of convicted wife killer Scott Peterson. And at Mule Creek, they apparently play pretty rough. TMZ is reporting that Peterson was beaten up the other day by a fellow inmate after hitting the ball directly at that inmate on the pickleball court. The word is that Scott Peterson was not badly hurt, but the prison officials did confirm to the Banfield show that there was indeed a run-in. Here's what they told us, and I will read it for you. On Sunday, March 9th, 2025, Scott Peterson was involved in an incident with another person at Mule Creek State Prison and suffered minor injuries. He continues to be housed at the institution. That's it. That's as much as we could get from the institution itself. But hey, look, I'll take it. They at least copped to the fact that he was injured. Whether anybody's pickleball privileges or any other privileges were revoked, I'm sorry, we don't know that. Still trying to get that. But either way, in prison or on the playground, it is a little reminder. It is always better to play nice. You could get yourself into a pickle otherwise.